there's a bunch going on tonight. A lot of news has broken in the last 24 hours, so let's get right to it. The 2014 Winter Olympics were held in Sochi in Russia. That was controversial, of course, because of all the things that are controversial about Russia under Vladimir Putin. You might remember that right before the Sochi Olympics, just a few weeks before the opening ceremonies, Vladimir Putin made what was widely seen as basically a concession to his international critics and his human rights critics, trying to take some of the heat off of Russia for hosting these Olympics. People were very upset about their human rights record, their domestic oppression, their international aggression, trying to take some of the heat off that. By just a few weeks before the Olympics started, Putin released some of the political prisoners who he was holding in Russian prisons. And among the most high-profile prisoners who Putin released right before the Sochi Olympics was a feminist punk band called Pussy Riot. And I am such a prude, I still find it embarrassing to say the name. But that is the name of the band, the thing they were most famous for when they were released right before the Sochi Olympics, and also ostensibly the thing they went to prison for, was what they called Punk Prayer. It was basically a performance art piece that happened in a church. It was very provocative in Russia. It was very directly critical of Vladimir Putin. And so the leaders of the band Pussy Riot were held in prison for 21 months before Putin released them ahead of the Sochi Olympics, right before the Olympics. So last year in February 2016, not all the members of the band, but some of the members of the band created a song and a music video that is the performance they are second most known for after the punk prayer that got them thrown in prison. This is the video they released last year, February. It's very well done. I don't speak Russian, so I'm not sure I totally get all of the lyrics, but I have to say I kind of like the song as well. This is the video for a song from Pussy Riot called Cheka. And one of the things that happens in the video, the singer who's sort of the hero of the music video, one of the things that she does repeatedly through the video is she makes this symbol of crossing her hands over her chest. And a lot of the other people in the video do that. Now, as I understand it, what that symbol means in context is that it's supposed to be wings, bird wings. It's actually supposed to signify a seagull, because that's what the word cheka, which is the title of the song, cheka in Russian means is seagull. That physical gesture of crossing your hands over your chest like that, that has come to be seen as a symbol for top-level corruption in Vladimir Putin's government, because the word Cheka means seagull, and the word Cheka is also the last name of Yuri Cheka, who is this guy, the top federal prosecutor in all of Russia, who was handpicked for that job by Vladimir Putin. Yuri Cheka. And you're probably getting the idea from the Pussy Riot video, which again is for a song called Cheka, that one of the things the criminal justice system under Yuri Cheka is known for in Russia is arresting and prosecuting enemies of Vladimir Putin and torturing people and killing people and disappearing people in Russian prisons. So that's part of what this is about. Part of is the criminal justice system and how Putin has used it in Russia and this artistic criticism of that. The reason that Yuri Cheka is not just a symbol of brutality, though, the reason he is also a symbol of corruption, the reason that crossed hands, wings thing has become a symbol of corruption, is largely because of an expose done by Alexei Navalny. We've talked about Alexei Navalny numerous times on this show. He's the most visible opposition figure in Russia. He plans to run for president next year against Vladimir Putin, although Putin's government says they're going to ban him from the ballot and not let him run. Alexei Navalny himself is just getting out of prison now, ensuing from the last round of major protests he and his movement organized against Putin in cities across Russia last month. Navalny's anti-corruption group produced a long video, basically a documentary, about Yuri Cheka, about the federal prosecutor in Russia, last year. An English language version of it came out in January last year. They produced a Russian language version of it before that. And the accusations in that documentary were that Yuri Cheka, in addition to being the top prosecutor in Putin's brutal government, the main allegation of this video about Cheka was that in addition to that, he and his family and he and his cronies have somehow also managed to amass massive wealth and a huge business empire, including a luxury spa hotel in Greece and gigantic salt mines in Russia and all these other things that you wouldn't think he'd be able to afford on his prosecutor's salary. Yuri Cheka, one of the most high-profile, hated and feared members of the Putin government, handpicked for the prosecutor position by Putin himself. Yuri Cheka is also now, I think, the most pronounceable Russian name in this week's torrent of astonishing news about the Trump campaign and the Trump family. Tuesday morning this week is when President Trump's eldest son released an email chain that led up to a previously undisclosed meeting in Trump Tower during the campaign, a meeting that has now blown up into a major problem for the Trump White House. Remember, the initial email in that chain referenced a prosecutor, right? This is an email from a British guy, Rob Goldstone, to Donald Trump Jr. on June 3rd of last year. They are acquaintances. Rob Goldstone has done a lot of work in Russia, although he is a British guy. And Rob Goldstone sends this first email to Donald J. Trump Jr. to start that chain of correspondence that leads to the meeting. His email says, "Good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia," that's what it says in the email. Now, everybody believes that to be a mistaken title. Maybe he's getting confused because he's British. Russia doesn't have a crown, so they don't have a crown prosecutor. Instead, they've got a prosecutor general, who is Yuri Cheka. But the email says, the Crown Prosecutor in Russia met with Emin's father this morning, and in their meeting, the prosecutor offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but it's part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. What do you think is the best way to handle this information? And that is the email that led to this meeting at Trump Tower during the campaign that has been the subject of so much focus this week and so much freakout at the White House. Part of the reason that meeting is attracting so much attention and has continued to over the course of this whole week is that nobody's just coming right out and saying what happened. For some reason, they won't just explain what happened and who was there, right? Initial reports were that Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer at Trump Tower last year. Then the next reports were that he met with a Russian lawyer to get information that he was told explicitly originated with the Russian government. Then we got a statement from Donald Trump Jr. saying, yes, he did take a meeting at Trump Tower last year with this lawyer, but it was actually a meeting about adoptions, mostly. Then we got a subsequent statement from Donald Trump Jr. saying, okay, actually, it was to get derogatory information about Hillary Clinton. Then we got the email chain, which clarified that it was definitely a meeting where they tried to get derogatory information from Hillary Clinton that was not only explicitly identified as coming from the Russian government, but it was going to be delivered to Trump Tower by what was described in the emails as a Russian government attorney. And then we learned that it wasn't just Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort were at that meeting, too. And they, too, had been notified this was a Russian government attorney coming to meet with them, bringing derogatory information that came from the Russian government. And then we learned it was not just all of them and the Russian government attorney. Today, we learned the group also included this guy, who NBC News first identified as a former Soviet counterintelligence officer suspected by some U.S. officials of having ongoing ties to Russian intelligence. So he was there, too. Despite all of these days of reporting and statements and admissions about this meeting, the presence of this guy, this former Russian military intelligence guy, the presence of this guy at the meeting was somehow left out of all the earlier disclosures, and we only found out about that today, thanks to NBC. In addition to him, there was also reportedly a translator there who is a relatively well-known person himself. I expect that you'll see a bunch of reporting about him and his potential role in this in the days ahead over the course of the weekend. That would bring the total number of people in the meeting to, let's see, Jr., Manafort, Kushner, the lawyer, the ex-counterintelligence guy, the translator. Also, on the lower right-hand side there, that's the British guy who wrote the emails to Don Jr. in the first place. So that brings the total number of people we now know in the meeting to 7. But CNN is also reporting that actually maybe it was 8. And maybe it was more than 8. CNN is reporting that there was somebody else in the meeting in addition who was there as a representative of the family of this Putin-linked Russian oligarch who initially took the meeting with Yuri Cheka, with the federal prosecutor in the first place that led to this whole thing. So we're now basically waiting to find out if there are any Russians who were in New York that day who were not in that meeting. And if so, is that just because they wouldn't fit in the elevator? Honestly, like, anything else to declare on this? But despite the way that story has already evolved to almost comic levels of denial and lack of transparency over the course of the week, tonight, the Wall Street Journal has reported on something very important about the origins of that meeting. Despite that Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, despite her disputing that she should ever have been described as a Russian government lawyer, despite her insisting, and the Trump White House insisting, that she had no links whatsoever to the Russian government, that she just happened to be a Russian person. Those denials, I should mention, coming from not just her, but coming from the White House, up to and including the president himself giving that denial. Can we play that clip for a second?
As far as my son is concerned, my son is a wonderful young man. He took a meeting with a Russian lawyer, not a government lawyer, but a Russian lawyer.
Tonight, the Wall Street Journal reports that despite those denials coming from everybody up to and including the president himself, this lawyer who went to Trump Tower and met with Trump's son and Trump's son-in-law and Trump's campaign chair last summer, along with all those other Russians that she brought with her, despite all of these denials, including from the president, that she had anything to do with the Russian government, the lawyer herself, Natalia Veselnitskaya, has now conceded to the Wall Street Journal that, in fact, she was working with Russian Prosecutor General Yuri Cheka on this. According to the Wall Street Journal tonight, Veselnitskaya, quote, said in an interview that she was meeting with Russian authorities regularly, and she shared information with the Russian Prosecutor General's office, including with Prosecutor General Yuri Cheka, a top official appointed by the Kremlin. Ms. Veselnitskaya told the Journal, quote, I personally know the general prosecutor. In the course of my investigation, I shared information with him. So, that meeting with the upper echelons of the Trump campaign in June of last year. Today we learned that it also included a former Russian counterintelligence officer who nobody thought to mention before. He also tells he tells the Associated Press that he and Natalia Veselnitskaya left documents about Hillary Clinton behind at that meeting for the Trump campaign to continue to review. We didn't know that before. We also now know that the Russian lawyer who was sent from Moscow as the emissary to deliver this derogatory information on Hillary Clinton, she now admits that she was working with one of the top officials in Vladimir Putin's government, the Siegel guy, Yuri Cheka, one of the highest-ranking officials and most recognizable officials in Putin's government. So, one of the things we have learned just over the course of this week, if we didn't know it before, is don't listen to what they say. Don't listen to what they say about their own behavior. I mean, it is interesting to listen to the Trump White House say things, because then you can accurately describe the things that they have said. You can quote them. That's data of a form, right? But it is a mistake to take statements from this White House as an accurate representation of what has happened in the world, of what they did, of who was in a meeting, of what a meeting was about, or what was said, or who was involved, or even the number of people in the room. You can hear them talking. It's okay to pay attention to the words that they say so you know what they have said, but don't take it as a representation of what happened in the world. I don't take pleasure in noting that is true about them, but just they've freaking earned it now. Luckily for us, as American citizens, as people trying to know what's going on in our government and trying to figure out what happened to us as a country last year, luckily for us, we do have other ways of obtaining information beyond just having to listen to our government, which isn't proving particularly trustworthy on these matters. Even if you are just, treating the administration like a silent movie and not hearing what they say, there are other ways to look at this and to understand what has been going on and what has happened to our country. Things that don't get clouded out or occluded by whatever noise they're making at the White House at the moment. For example, one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight is the stack of intelligence reports that have been reported on since the beginning of this scandal. Quite quietly, over the course of this week, we actually got a bunch of new reporting about what our intelligence agencies knew and when they knew it as the Russia attack was unfolding. And this is not an exhaustive list, but just for example, we learned this week from the Wall Street Journal that U.S. intelligence agencies, as early as the spring of 2015, so months before Trump ever announced he was running, in the spring of 2015, U.S. intelligence agencies were observing and reporting on a surprisingly large number of meetings between people associated with Donald Trump and Russian government officials. By 1 year later, in the spring of 2016, we know also from the Wall Street Journal this week that there were reports from European intelligence agencies who alerted their intelligence colleagues in the U.S. that significant amounts of money of Russian origin, for some reason, appeared to be flooding into the U.S. presidential election. Again, those intelligence reports were from European agencies notifying their U.S. intelligence counterparts that Russian money was coming into our election. Expect to hear a lot more about that particular intelligence in the future. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. In May of 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies reportedly overheard Russian military intelligence officials talking about their plans to disseminate disparaging info about Hillary Clinton in the United States with an eye toward influencing the election. By July of 2016, former CIA Director John Brennan has said that the CIA had observed enough contacts and interactions between Russian officials and persons involved in the Trump campaign that there were significant CIA concerns about whether those Trump campaign individuals might be wittingly or unwittingly cooperating with the Russians. That was last summer. That is when the CIA formed a working group to assess that information, and they ended up handing it over to the FBI, which is what started the FBI counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign. We have also now learned that by sometime around the end of the summer last year, sometime around Labor Day, intelligence reports that had been examined by U.S. investigators showed Russian hackers discussing amongst themselves how to obtain Hillary Clinton's emails with an eye to delivering them to Trump senior advisor Michael Flynn via an intermediary. That last one also from the Wall Street Journal. Those are all just intelligence reports that we have now learned about, right, through the press, regardless of what the White House says about them. As those intelligence reports were coming in during the attack, we're going to be talking tonight about what people who knew what they were looking at, what professionals in this field believed they were seeing as those reports were coming in real time. And so, we've sort of said this from the beginning, silent movie. Do not listen to what they say. There's plenty to keep up with just in terms of what we can see happening. I mean, just today, Trump campaign advisor Michael Caputo, who's had a long business history in Russia, he testified behind closed doors to the House Intelligence Committee. Today, that same committee delayed its planned testimony from another Trump advisor after that advisor went on a talk radio show with Michael Caputo in upstate New York. On that talk radio show, he issued a threat to Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who's a member of House Intel. The Trump campaign advisor said on the radio about Congressman Swalwell, quote, "I think he is a yellow-bellied coward. I do not think he will show up for the hearing, but if he does show, he will regret it for the rest of his life." After that threat to the congressman, the planned testimony from that Trump campaign advisor was delayed, although we do not know if it was delayed because of the threat to the congressman or if that's just a coincidence. On top of all that, Jared Kushner lost his top lawyer today. Jamie Gorelick, who's a very well-regarded Democratic lawyer in Washington, she dropped out today of representing Jared Kushner when it comes to matters related to Russia, although she will continue to represent him on other matters. Also today, Bloomberg reported that the president himself may be replacing at the top of his legal team his somewhat troubled personal lead counsel on Russia matters, New York lawyer Mark Kasowitz, who we talked about a lot on this show last night and the night before. Apparently, Trump may be considering a new lawyer named Ty Cobb, who will now head up the president's Russia defense both in the media and on legal issues. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot going on. There's also a lot being said, but trust me, it's all nonsense. What's going on is moving fast enough that it's worth focusing on that and not getting distracted by the noise, honestly, now more than ever. We got a lot ahead tonight. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.